Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Amelia Kale, and I'm the Barbara C. and Harvey P. Hood 1918 Curator of Academic Programming here at the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth. Welcome to our first Space for Dialogue talk of 2021. Before we get underway, I'd like to point out that you will see a poll pop up with a marketing question asking how you heard about today's program. And as a quick point of reference, I know many of you have already started doing this. We just love to know where everyone is joining from today. So if you could pop your state or country into the chat, we'd appreciate it. Today's program will run for approximately 45 minutes, and we'll have some time to answer some questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to enter any questions ahead of time using the Q&A button. We are recording, and we will make this program available on the Hood Museum of Art's YouTube channel, the link for which we will send in a follow-up email. If your device allows, you can enhance your viewing experience of the program by clicking the caret next to viewing options, next to the green bar that notes the speaker is sharing their screen. And the speaker will share their screen just a little ways into the program. Once that happens, you can scroll down to side by side and should be able to view both the presentation and the speaker without overlap. You can slide the vertical bar from left to right to make the speaker tiles smaller and larger. So eventually you'll have our speaker, Allison Carey, in one window. You'll have another speaker, which is going to be this frame. I'm going to step out and you'll see the gallery behind me. And then you'll have the PowerPoint that Allison is sharing. So you can move that vertical bar to adjust those ratios if you want to see some parts larger or smaller. You may also zoom in on the presentation by adjusting your zoom ratio, also located under viewing options. If you're joining us on an iPad, you can zoom in and out by pinching your fingers on the screen. We are also providing Zoom's auto-generated captions. This is not a perfect service, so please be aware that there are bound to be some translation errors. If you wish to turn the captions off, you can go to the live captions icon on your Zoom toolbar and select hide subtitles. We're also going to put the PowerPoint in the chat, so if it's easier for you to download it and view it that way, that is also an option, if you'd like to refer to it later. And now that we've got some of the housekeeping out of the way, it is my great pleasure to introduce Allison Carey. Allison spent her senior year as the class of 1954 curatorial intern at the Hood Museum of Art. She worked directly under Bonnie McAdam, the museum's former curator of American art. While at the Hood, Allison helped Bonnie with the preparation of the upcoming show, The Built Environment, worked on reports for recently acquired objects in the museum's collection, and organized and co-moderated an Alumna in the Arts career panel. Outside of the Hood, Allison studied art history and education at Dartmouth, while also maintaining her personal photography practice. While at Dartmouth, her interest in the intersection of art and education led her to an internship for school programs at the Whitney Museum of Art in New York City. Inspired by the incredible discourse afforded through art spaces like the Whitney, Allison decided she wanted to pursue curatorial work. Subsequently, she interned in the curatorial department at the Guggenheim Museum and at the Walther Collection, a small photography foundation, before her time at the Hood Museum. Allison graduated last year from Dartmouth in June of 2020. Today, she is living in New York City, working remotely for the Smithsonian American Art Museum on an expansive project documenting the lives of 10 underrepresented female artists through innovative digital platforms. She is also working part-time for the Aquavella Galleries on the Upper East Side. Allison hopes to attend graduate school next year, where she will continue studying the methods through which art and museums can illuminate repeatedly omitted historic narratives, especially within the context of the movements for equal rights over the last half century. So I'm going to step out and let you enjoy this live stream, this in-gallery view of Allison's exhibition, while we all enjoy her talk. So welcome, Allison.
Thank you so much, Amelia. That was such a kind introduction. And thank you to everyone who's here right now. I know I can't see your faces, but I can see all your names, and it just makes me so happy to have such an amazing supportive group here. So I'm going to share my screen because I have a PowerPoint that kind of goes along with my talk. But as Amelia mentioned, there's also a live feed of the gallery space. So let me try to figure this out. Okay. Is that working? I'm hoping.
Yes, we can see your
Okay, great. Amazing. Okay. So before I dive into this, I just want to say a few more thank yous. I want to take a moment to thank the Hood Museum for offering me this incredible opportunity to curate a show and supporting me throughout the process. Creating this show from ground up was not an easy task, and COVID-19 hitting a week after I installed it made it especially difficult. But I am forever grateful to the Hood for their determination and efforts to keep the show alive through virtual spaces like this one. I want to extend a special thank you to Bonnie McAdam, who was my direct supervisor at the Hood. I learned so much from Bonnie. She would drop everything to offer me incredibly helpful feedback and advice during this process, from the color of my walls to the punctuation in my object labels. I'm just extremely grateful for her mentorship. And along similar lines, I want to thank Amelia for her ongoing support, especially as we transition this gallery talk to these virtual platforms. She's offered amazing expertise and guidance. Thank you to Susan, Isadora, Randall, Niels, Allison, Lauren, Meredith, and Patrick for all their help with the nitty-gritty details of the show, from the frames to the copyright permissions. And once again, just thank you to the Hood. The Hood really became my second home during my senior year. I spent a lot of time in those office spaces, and I miss being surrounded by everyone, and I'm grateful for this experience and what they offered me. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into my presentation and talk a bit about my exhibition, When Art Intersects History. So when I first sat down to begin planning out this exhibition, I was extremely overwhelmed, to say the least. The Hood Museum has over 60,000 objects in its collection, which makes it one of the largest and also oldest collections of any college or university in the country. So imagine sitting there and having this incredibly robust, huge collection at your disposal and being told, okay, you can choose around 10, 12 objects and create a show about anything. Oh my God, where does one even begin? It's so overwhelming. It's exciting, but that's a lot to handle. So for me, I kind of went back to the basics. Creating the show felt like my senior thesis. I wanted it to be a capstone for the past 4 years I've spent delving into the field of art history and museum studies. So with that in mind, I asked myself the most simple question I could think of, which is, why do I study art history? It's a question I've been asked many times before. Why am I so drawn to art, and how can I convey that to a greater audience through this exhibition opportunity? The answer is equally simple. I study art because I believe that art offers us unique, often overlooked perspectives on the past. I think that James Baldwin sums it up nicely in this quote. He wrote, "An artist is a sort of emotional or historical or spiritual historian. His role is to make you realize the doom and glory of knowing who you are and what you are." I've had this quote saved on my computer's desktop since my sophomore year of college when I decided to study art history, because I very strongly believe in Baldwin's words. Through art, we gain a more emotional account of history and our current realities. Art offers us inclusive views of the narratives that shape the past. So I decided I wanted to create a show that interrogated this very claim, ultimately asking the question, what happens when we assess art as a document of history? In order to do this, I decided to specifically focus in on the second half of the 20th century. This politically charged century reached its climax in the 1960s and 70s with the confluence of the civil rights movement, women's rights campaigns, gay rights movement, and Vietnam War protests. All of these events were propelled by a mounting countercultural cry for equality and social justice. So my exhibition considers how American artists have invaluably captured their perspectives on these galvanizing historic moments. So obviously we're not in the space right now. So I brought these photos. This is a picture of the model that I used when I was mocking up my exhibition and choosing where I would hang things on the wall. And hopefully that gives you a better idea of what the physical gallery looks like. If you were in the museum at my show, you would notice that it's loosely categorized by those different movements for equality that I just mentioned. There are a handful of pieces documenting various facets of the civil rights movement, a work that speaks to ongoing Native American discrimination, art dealing with gender inequality and the women's rights movement, and 2 pieces considering social injustices during the Vietnam War. On the main wall, right next to my wall text, the first section deals with racial inequality. And what you see here is one of the works, which is a screen print titled Core by Robert Rauschenberg. In this work, Rauschenberg is explicitly laying out narratives that construct this moment in time. The title, CORE, is an acronym for the Congress of Racial Equality, which was actively fighting for desegregation legislation in the 1960s. So in this work, Rauschenberg is collaging an array of photographs. There's a picture of JFK, an image of the Statue of Liberty, a Native American, a Civil War soldier, pictures that are documenting ongoing industrial development. What Rauschenberg is doing is he's juxtaposing these moments of national glory against ongoing struggles. And together, all of these individual components are speaking to the larger American experience of the time. I think that the chaotic overlap of these materials, along with the ambiguous transparency of some of the images, conveys a greater national sentiment of both success and defeat, clarity, but also a lack of cohesive certainty. When I first saw this object in the collection, I was so excited because there couldn't be a better example of art that's actively, explicitly documenting history in a way that so clearly narrates the current events and the general mood of a period. So that's why I put it right in the center of the main wall next to my wall text, and why I put it on the cover of my brochure. But what I want to say is that I realized throughout this process that each work of art doesn't need to as explicitly reference a moment or an event in order to effectively document the past. So for example, at the end of this long wall, on the right hand of the screen, there's a much smaller piece by George Tucker titled Half Dozen Eggs. And obviously this painting is quite small compared to the Rauschenberg, but like CORE, it's also referencing the civil rights movement. It was actually created for a civil rights auction held in Hanover in 1963, with the proceeds donated to the NAACP. Oh, well, okay, that's unfortunate. But anyway, the way that Half Dozen Eggs is narrating this moment in history is much more subtle. Tucker simply paints brown and white eggs sharing a container. By doing so, he seems to suggest that equality should be as commonplace as eggs in a carton. I really love this work because although it is so small and delicate, it is also a very strong protest against societal norms of the time. And it shows that even the simple object study can powerfully convey the mood of a period. Next to that work is this portrait by Native American artist Fritz Shoulder, and this offers a much more open-ended narrative. Shoulder actually vowed to never paint a Native American figure early in his career because he thought that the subject was an overdone cliche. He clearly broke that vow here, but he did so in a way that actively pushes against comfortable stereotypes. The figure's mouth communicates a gaping cry, but the lack of visible body or context makes the narrative unclear. This piece is actively broadening our understanding of what it meant to be a Native American in the 70s. It's reframing history's common, noble, savage stereotype, and instead offering a portrait of a man who is emotive and fragmented, surrounded by a void that could allude to erasure and loss. My show also nods to perhaps less traditional forms of artistic expression, types of art you don't always see in a museum. So, for example, this corner is dealing with gender inequality and specifically looking at the women's rights movement. And in that case is a documentation of a performance piece that took place in 1978. This is what the piece looks like when it's in its full form. And so these two artists, George Machunas and Billy Hutching, got married, and they commemorated their wedding through a Fluxus ceremony. Fluxus was this experimental art movement in the 60s and 70s that emphasized the production of the work rather than the final product. So performance art was a common type of Fluxus art. And in this Fluxus wedding ceremony, the couple is slowly stripping off their respective suit and dress and trading outfits with one another in entirety, including a complete exchange of wigs. They had their friend, another artist, Hollis Melton, come to the event, and he documented it through these photographs, which he wove together into this accordion book form. He said that the performance was beautiful and possessed, quote unquote, an overwhelming dignity. Originally, this performance was likely seen as a statement against gender norms. This dignified exchange of dress is a firm call for greater freedom from traditional roles within marriage. But I think that this piece is especially interesting because it has gained a whole new level of significance in today's day and age. The piece set the stage for future, now current campaigns for not just gender equality, but also gender fluidity. The work is a great example of art's ability to document how history has led us to our present moment, how past events and the humanity and the emotions interconnected with those events have actively shaped where we are now. My hope is that the combination of these works I've just shown you, along with other works in my show that I haven't spoken about, demonstrate the incredible capacity of various forms of creative expression to illuminate perspectives and narratives that may have otherwise been ignored or negated. But in order to really drill this point home, in order to make sure that my audience was really kind of beginning to understand art's capacity as a document of history, I thought it would be effective to compare certain works in my exhibition to more traditional forms of historic documentation. So what I did is I went to Dartmouth's Ronner Special Collections Library, and I spent hours upon hours sifting through archives of the Dartmouth, which is our campus newspaper, which happens to be America's oldest college newspaper. Fun fact, lots of old things at Dartmouth. But what I did was I pulled newspaper excerpts that described the very events depicted in some of the artwork in my show. So for example, this is a Jacob Lawrence painting titled Soldiers and Students, and it reflects struggles for school desegregation by depicting 10 Black students tightly grasping their school books in the shadows of massive soldiers and mocking protesters. The scene is reminiscent of Little Rock Nine, which was a group of Black students who enrolled in an all-white high school in Arkansas in 1957. On the first day of classes, the Arkansas National Guard blocked the students' entry into the school while protesters against desegregation flooded the area. I found this article in the Dartmouth, written in 1957, that reports that event. They describe Little Rock Nine students as facing a wild day of hate and violence, and President Eisenhower's response, which promised to use the full force of federal power to deal with further violence. I put the excerpt directly in my object label next to the painting. By doing so, I was asking viewers to consider how the different modes of communication vary. What perspectives does the Lawrence painting reveal that the newspaper perhaps omits? Back to this piece by Fritz Shoulder, I also included a newspaper article in its object label. This was a little different because I chose to use an op-ed article published in the Dartmouth in March of 1979. This piece was written collectively by the students of Dartmouth's African American Society, Native Americans of Dartmouth, and the Latino Forum. During Winter Carnival, these groups, quote unquote, deface the ice sculpture on the green with black and red paint. This is a photo of that. After angry backlash from the undergraduate population, the minority students came together and they wrote an article explaining the purpose for their demonstration, which was to make clear their dissatisfaction with the manner in which minority students at Dartmouth were treated. They explained that the college is in fact a hostile environment for those who do not fit within the traditional mold, that is white, male, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. They concluded that it is their sincere hope that as a result of their rally, the college will begin to listen to our voice crying out in the wilderness, a reference to the college's motto. This op-ed is more personalized than a traditional journalistic account of the past. Like Shoulder's work, it's an emotional appeal for a broadening of perspectives. So by including it, I'm asking audiences how this sort of textual call for equality differs from Shoulder's work of art. Are there certain emotions that are gleaned from the painting that the newspaper maybe doesn't convey? But also when we see the two side by side, how are we gaining a more holistic understanding of the past and seeing many different perspectives that come together to create a fuller understanding? Ultimately, by including these newspapers, I'm aiming to demonstrate that human reality is extremely complicated, tempered by these vast differences in perspective and place. Art augments our understanding of the past as it is described through just words or speech. So here are some photographs when I hung my exhibition, which was on March 4th of 2020. Less than a week later, COVID fully had hit America and we were all in lockdown, and the Hood Museum unfortunately had to close their doors to the public. So obviously, since hanging my show, the world has changed dramatically. We found ourselves facing dual pandemics, COVID-19 and systemic racism, which has been brought to the fore by the heightened visibility of the Black Lives Matter movement. I've thought a lot about what that means for my exhibition, how that has changed the meaning of my exhibition, but also how the role that my show plays has also changed. What I realized is that when I set out to curate the show, I was very focused on the past. I was looking at the 60s and 70s and trying to consider how art could convey that time period in a unique, more inclusive form. But what I've realized is that today, I think that my show more directly speaks to the present and the future. In an intensely polarized moment that is demanding the recognition of unreconciled histories of human equality, my exhibition showcases strategies through which art can illuminate these repressed narratives, prompting productive public discourse where traditional forms of communication both have and continue to fail us. These student-curated exhibitions are called spaces for dialogue, and that's exactly what I hope I have created through When Art Intersects History. I hope that my show offers a space, even if that space is the virtual one like this, where viewers can come together and engage in historic discernment and progressive engagement, where art and artists help us realize and grapple with, as Baldwin stated, who and what we are, the doom, the glory, and everything in between. By doing so, maybe we will be able to make better sense of today. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer some questions now, if we have some time.
Hi, Allison and everybody. Thank you so much, Allison, for that wonderful talk. I have a question to start you off, and we'd love to hear other questions from folks as well. So when you started off, you had this really, I would say, kind of heavily theoretical concept. And you had a whole lot of art options in the collection, right? You had a really big list of things from a really wide time period and things that looked really different. How did you balance the content of the pieces that you chose along with the aesthetics of the pieces that you ended up choosing for your show?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, like I said, it was really overwhelming, quite honestly. There were so many pieces, and like my idea is you can really apply to any work of art, right? Like what I'm trying to say is that we can look at any piece of art and we can consider it not only for its aesthetic value, but also for what that meant during the period in which it was created. So that just meant that I almost could choose anything. I think for me, it was really important to find a balance of art that both spoke to these different movements and really conveyed a holistic scope of that period and time, but also art that didn't necessarily as explicitly lay out a certain moment in history, so we could gain an understanding of how all art works as this method of understanding the past. So I kind of talked about that with that Rauschenberg that you see right there in the middle of the screen versus that painting of eggs in a carton. What it really looked like was just taking a lot of different works of art and looking at them all together. I printed them out, I cut them out, and I played around with them on that model and seeing what both conveyed the time period and the mood and the energy and the political events going on, but also what looked nice together. And there were a lot of strategies also to maybe bring in works that kind of stood out or didn't necessarily go along with everything aesthetically, but make it one cohesive group of art. So for example, one thing I don't think you always think about when you're looking at an exhibition is like the frames around a work of art, and the matting. And that's something that I had to really consider is, did I want to have each work of art have its own kind of unique frame, or did I want to find one cohesive frame for the pieces at least that weren't bound to a certain frame that they came with, to make it all go together. And as you can see, I really chose to use the same mat and frame where I could. And I think that really ties things together aesthetically while still letting each work stand on its own and speak for its own event and moment. I hope that kind of answers that question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much for that great answer. So we have a few questions around this theme, so I'm going to kind of consolidate it into one question. You talked about how the significance of your work feels really different in 2021 than it did when you were working on it. So a few folks were wondering if you could choose another work from this past year, maybe a piece of contemporary art that you would add to your exhibition. What would you choose? Do you have any ideas? Is there a way that you'd like to kind of bring your exhibition into 2020, 2021?
Yeah. So one of my favorite artists has always been a contemporary artist named Titus Kaffer, and he has a really amazing TED Talk. He has two now, but the first one really inspired my study of art history, and it's called "Can Art Amend History?" And what Titus does is he takes he creates work that really explicitly reframes the past. So he'll take historic portraits and he'll redo them in a way that, perhaps blocks out all of the white people in the traditional Renaissance painting and instead sheds a light on the Black slave in the background, for example. And he's really gained a lot of popularity. He had a piece that was on the cover of the Times when the Black Lives Movement was really gaining the recognition it deserves. And I think that piece would be especially powerful in the show, given its relevance to 2021, but also I think it shows how contemporary artists come into play, how they can look back on the past and they can use their practice to help reveal perspectives that we may not have otherwise seen. That illuminating power of art that I've spoken about and that I think you can see in a lot of works here, how that's still functioning today, and how that still allows us to reflect on the past through contemporary practices. So that's my answer to that.
Great, that's perfect, thank you. So I have a question from one of your professors, from Professor Mary Coffey, and for your class, or for her classes, I know that you curated some digital exhibitions. So Professor Coffey is asking, how is it different curating a real exhibition versus curating a theoretical exhibition for class in a digital space? This is a question that seems really relevant now as we're doing so much in the digital space. What did working in real space and with real objects teach you that might have been obscured in the digital space?
Well, the first thing that I immediately think of is just the scale. When you're working on the digital, you don't necessarily need to worry about that as much, which can be great because maybe you can put more works of art in one place. But also I think that scale is really important. I said it before, but I'll say it again, like that small painting, that carton of eggs. And then there are also a few smaller works on the other side of the space that are dealing with women's rights. I think that it's interesting to kind of have to get up close and to look really closely and see the physicality of the small object and realize how powerful something so delicate and small can still be. I think you lose that when you're on a digital platform, and you lose that materiality. Obviously, you can't touch works of art in museums, even though I've like almost forgotten that at times. But when you're up close and personal with a lot of these works, you can see this texture. With that book that's in that case, you can sort of see how it was folded together. And it's this physical, three-dimensional object. I think that's really important because the object itself is so powerful, and seeing it in person just gains a whole new level of significance and ability to communicate mood or a certain energy. So I think that was the biggest thing I really learned and noticed while working in a physical space after having done virtual exhibitions for classes like Professor Coffey's. And it really made me appreciate and remember the importance of seeing art in person. Even taking art history classes, it's so great because you can look at a lot of art and understand the different periods and eras by clicking through slides, but nothing compares to actually being up close and standing in front of a work of art and being able to appreciate it for its size, its materiality, and just kind of the mood it's able to convey within a space.
Yes, I agree. And I really hope that we all can get back to having that experience a little more frequently, hopefully in the coming months and year.
I guess if I can say one more thing about that though, like one thing I've also realized is that the digital is fantastic because it opens up museums to new audiences. And Amelia mentioned early on, I'm working for the Smithsonian American Art Museum right now on this project that's documenting lives of underrepresented female artists through digital platforms. And I'm loving that, and I love being a part of that because even though I don't necessarily get to see these objects in person, I know that was already a privilege to be able to step into a museum and look at those things up close. So through the internet, we can share works of art and the stories of artists and the stories of the past that may have been repressed or not seen with a much greater public. So that's definitely a pro for working more on the digital, and something that I think COVID is shedding a light upon within the museum and institutional space.
Very much so. I think we're seeing that even with this program here, where there are many more people who have come in to listen to you than would fit in the small Gutman Gallery here in the museum. So we're really happy that all of you could be here this afternoon. I have a question from a current Hood intern, Hadley, who's working, in fact, on a virtual space for dialogue this year. And he asks, were there any helpful resources that you found? Was there any sort of surprising resources that you found while working on your show?
Hi, Hadley. I miss working next to you. Okay, well, the best resources are the people at the Hood themselves. The museum is so incredible because all the curators and really everyone, a registrar, every single individual I worked with knows the collection so well. Again, this is a humongous museum collection. There are over 60,000 objects, and it's pretty special to have these individuals who can speak so eloquently and so knowledgeably to each work of art. So that was the best resource I had. And it was amazing because it wasn't just Bonnie was amazing and incredibly helpful, but I also felt like I could pop into any curator's office and sort of ask them a question about a work of art that lied under their expertise. And the Hood being so small just made it such a community and such a welcoming setting where that was possible. Other than that, well, the publications that the museums produced were great. That was an amazing way for me to just sift through all the art and kind of like, circle things and see what I might want to pull out. And then also, again, just going and seeing the art in person. A lot of the art, I think most of the art in my show is actually stored in the physical museum. And I'm not sure if this is possible for you because of COVID, but I was able to go and look at a lot of it up close and in person. And that was so fantastic because, again, certain works I realized in person, oh, you know what, maybe that doesn't aesthetically or conceptually work with my show, but other works I was blown away by when I didn't expect to be. And it was pretty incredible that I could just get in an elevator behind the gallery walls, go down into the basement and have these huge racks of art that were being pulled out to show me every single option for my show. Oh, Amelia, I think you're muted. Amelia, I think you're muted. Okay. Oh, I think she's realizing. I can't hear you. Maybe I could figure out how to work this Q&A thing. She's been pulling the questions for me, but I feel like she probably has better ones. Let's see.
I'm happy to jump in here. Ellie,
yeah, I see one question. Oh, now everyone's speaking.
Oh, can you hear me? So I switched our microphone audio access, so I'll be echoey, but can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, well, it can't be a virtual program without one little tiny text on it, right? So I guess so I have a question from Professor Christina Seeley, who is asking, how does your creative practice inform the way you approach your curation?
That's the question I was going to pull. Hi, Professor Seeley. I'm so glad you could make it. Professor Seeley was my photography professor at Dartmouth. I've thought a lot about this, especially as I've been applying to graduate school and thinking about how I got here. I started off as a photographer. In high school, I was really drawn to photography, and I spent a lot of my extra time working on my photography practice. And at Dartmouth, I found myself really drawn to the field of art history. And I think part of the reason for that was through my own photography practice, I was realizing how my pictures were kind of enabling these connections with greater audiences. When I put my work on a wall or was in a crit for photography class, I saw how people were sort of coming together and having these amazing conversations and starting to see things how I may see them or suggest how they may see something differently. So all of that to say is through my photography practice, I started realizing this connective power of art. And I think that personal experience with art and with my own practice is what drew me towards art history, because I realized how that power of art to bring communities together, it transcended time and it went all the way back to the first piece of art ever discovered. So I felt like I kind of had a personal connection and understanding of how that functioned. So yeah, that sort of answers the question. I think also I just have used my own photography practice to look at the world differently. I feel like when you're behind the camera, looking through the lens, you're trying to see things, you're seeing things from different perspectives, and having that personal understanding of how I take a photograph and how I create a work of art out of nothing helps me look at works of art created by other artists differently. I think less just about what I see, but also the process of creating what I see. And I think that's especially relevant with this exhibition, because I'm not just thinking about, oh, what are the aesthetic qualities right in front of me? What did Rauschenberg, what did Lawrence, what colors are they using? What am I looking at right now? I'm also thinking about what was going on around them when they were creating that. And that gets back to the whole idea of my show. What inspired this? What did they see that others may not have seen? And I think the reason I'm able to ask all these questions is because I have a very intimate relationship with that very process through my own artistic practice. Thank you for that question.
Right, so first of all, it kind of leads off of that a little bit. So art of its kind can be very powerful for us in the moment. I think we're feeling that in this moment particularly. But how do you think these artists would feel about their works as being seen as artifacts of history? If you're making something that's relevant in the moment, what does it feel like to 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, have your art be that remnant? Can you reflect on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it's interesting because when I first had the idea for the show, I pulled up that Baldwin quote, which I'm sure all my professors and supervisors are stop quoting the Baldwin quote. Come on, Allie, time to move on. But I did it. I quoted the Baldwin quote and I was like, this is what I want to make a show about, the artist as the historian. And I remember so clearly kind of pitching that idea and everyone being like, okay, this is a good start. It wasn't that easy. You would be like, this is a good start, but you can't necessarily say that the artist is a historian. I remember that really clearly, and I was kind of bummed out because I had this vision of the show being called the artist as historian. You can't necessarily say that that's who they are or who they identify with. And I think that was really important for me to remember. So even when I went through the show and I chose works of art, I wanted to make sure that the wording I was using wasn't necessarily saying that this is what the artist completely intended for us to look at this and see it as a document of history. But nonetheless, that is what it has become. All art is a document of the past. All art is an artifact. And I think it was interesting to balance writing my object labels and writing about each work of art and showing how it does express or convey the mood of a time, but also not saying that it's necessarily tied to that or that was the original intention. Instead, it's a resource to us, but we have to be aware of kind of where we draw the line between what we see and what we feel and what we interpret versus what the artist felt and what the artist was thinking when they made it, which we never know for sure. So that's not necessarily a concrete answer, but all of this is to say that these are things that I had to keep in mind as I was curating the show, to not kind of conflate the artist, the historian, what I see, what they see. And it was interesting to have to write out text that described the works of art while being cognizant of that. And that's something that I think anytime you walk into any museum or any exhibition, you have to be aware of the artist's identity, what you see, and your own identity. There are a lot of different factors at play.
Yes, I agree. Thank you so much. So we're going to take one more question and then we'll give some brief closing remarks. So this last question is from Natalie. How did your art history experience change with the reopening of the Museum of Art in 2019? And did having a working museum on campus help lead your interest into having a career in museums?
Can you repeat that question? Sorry, I kind of
So no worries. How did your art history experience change with the museum's reopening in 2019? And did having a working museum on campus, having the museum open and available to you, help influence your idea to go in the direction of museums for your career?
That's a great question. Yeah, it was definitely, when I first started studying art history at Dartmouth, I obviously I knew what the hood was, but it wasn't open because it was under this massive renovation project. And I think that was kind of difficult at times, but what was so incredible about the Hood was everyone was still working there behind the scenes, and the curators were still coming into my classes, and my professors were still collaborating with different museum staff. So I think that I was still kind of gaining an understanding of the role that the institution and the museum plays in my study of art history. And Dartmouth has a fantastic art history department. It is a small but extremely mighty team of professors, and I felt like I got a lot of really great specialized attention, and I just learned so much from working with these incredible scholars. And when the museum opened, I mean, I've kind of said this before, but I really began to realize the importance of the physicality of artwork, but also the role that space itself plays in art history. I saw how being in a physical gallery surrounded by strangers, which is a crazy concept right now, but nonetheless, that is a space for dialogue. It becomes a space where you can, maybe you're not talking to the person next to you, but you're looking at the same thing and you're having these thoughts, and you're perhaps discussing it with whoever you went to the museum with, and you're starting to have these like new considerations of the past, the present, the future. So it was really great to have these two forces at play, to see kind of in the classroom what I would learn and how that translated into a physical space where people were there together and kind of participating in these different conversations about our realities.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to change my video feed just for a second.
I'll stop the share.
To give you a sense, to get everyone kind of a backstage view of how we're working here. So I'd like to say a warm thank you to Allie and for everyone who joined us today. And I'd like to thank Randall Coleman, who ran the camera today, made this live gallery shot possible with his videography skills. Also to Kate Armstrong, who is here as a guide who supported us as well. And of course to Sharon Reed, who you saw, who really makes this webinar and all of our webinars run so smoothly in this move to the virtual. So we'd ask that you take a moment to complete a short survey that will be emailed tomorrow. And we encourage you to visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you will find many of our recorded programs that you can now view at your leisure. Please visit our website to find out what is coming up next in terms of programming, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a safe and lovely evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. It means so much.